Part 1 moved quickly from the moment Michael and Grace saw Alina again, as if life itself had been waiting for her return. They met in a small Portland cafe on a cool evening, the kind where the light outside turned soft and gold. Michael and Grace had arrived early, sitting across from each other with that comfortable silence that comes when two people know each other deeply, but haven't had a real conversation in a while. Their relationship had been steady for years. Yet recently it felt like they were walking side by side without fully looking at each other. Still caring, still loyal, but missing some spark they couldn't name. When Alina pushed open the cafe door, shaking the cold from her coat, everything seemed to shift. She looked different, but somehow the same, older in a graceful way. With eyes that hinted she had lived through things she hadn't yet shared. She spotted them instantly, breaking into the kind of smile that makes a room feel warmer. Grace stood up first, hugging her tightly, surprised by the wave of emotion that rose up in her chest. Michael followed, his voice brighter than it had been in months. They all sat down, talking fast, catching up on years in minutes. Alina had been away for work, traveling constantly, never staying in one place long enough for roots. She said it lightly, but Grace noticed the tired edge beneath her words, as if she had been running too long. The conversation flowed easily, almost strangely so, as if no time had passed. They laughed harder than they expected, and the people at nearby tables kept glancing over, sensing the energy of a reunion that mattered. Grace found herself watching Alina more than she meant to. Noticing small things, how gently she held her coffee cup, how her voice softened when she talked about missing home, how Michael relaxed around her in a way he rarely did with anyone. Grace knew it wasn't romantic, not in any troubling way, but it felt meaningful. Like Alina reminded them of who they used to be before life became routines and responsibilities. Michael asked Alina why she chose now to come back, and she hesitated only a moment before answering. She said she was tired of feeling like she lived everywhere and nowhere. She missed people who felt real to her. She missed them. Grace's chest tightened at the quiet honesty in her voice. She didn't want to admit it, but hearing that filled a space inside her she hadn't realized was empty. The three of them stayed long past the time they meant to leave, talking about old memories, inside jokes, and choices that had shaped their lives. But beneath every word, there was something unspoken, an emotional pull none of them intended and none of them fully understood. When they finally stepped outside, the night was cold and crisp, the air smelling faintly of pine and rain. Alina wrapped her scarf a little tighter, and Grace found herself wishing she could say something comforting but didn't know what. Michael offered to walk her to her car, and as they moved through the quiet street, Grace felt a strange sensation in her chest. Not jealousy, but recognition. Alina wasn't just an old friend returning. She was someone whose presence filled a gap neither Grace nor Michael had realized had grown between them. When Alina reached her car, she paused, resting her hand on the door handle, looking at them with an expression that held more emotion than words could cover. She said she was grateful they still felt like home to her. She didn't know what she had expected, but she hadn't expected this warmth. Grace stepped forward quickly, touching Alina's arm in a simple, human gesture, and telling her she would always have a place with them. The words surprised even Grace, but they felt true the moment she said them. Elena's smile wavered slightly, not from sadness, but from something deeper, something she seemed afraid to name. She said she hoped she wouldn't disrupt their lives by being back. Grace laughed softly, assuring her that nothing about seeing her again felt like a disruption. But inside she wondered why the moment felt heavier than it should have. When Alina drove away, Michael and Grace stood on the sidewalk a moment longer than necessary, both staring after her car, not speaking but sharing the same quiet feeling. As they walked back to their own car, Grace realized she felt a warmth she hadn't felt in months, but also a confusion she wasn't ready to admit. Michael opened the door for her and paused, as if thinking the same thing. But neither spoke. They simply drove home, both carrying the same soft question neither wanted to say aloud. Why did it feel like Elena's return had awakened something they had been missing without even knowing it? The weeks after Elena's return passed in a blur of moments that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. As if the world had shifted slightly, but the three of them were the only ones who noticed. Every meeting carried a sense of urgency, a need to catch up on lost time. Yet there was an underlying tension neither Grace nor Michael could ignore. They spent afternoons wandering along the river, the water rushing beside them like a reminder that life never paused for anyone, and evenings curled up in the living room, talking until the room grew dark and the quiet outside pressed in. Elena seemed different, here more relaxed. But there was also a subtle sadness beneath her smiles that drew Grace's attention more than she cared to admit. She watched how Michael listened when Elena spoke, the way his eyes softened, and she realized that the bond they had shared with her was not just old familiarity, but something living, delicate, and fragile. Grace herself found her thoughts wandering to Elena when she wasn't around, catching herself smiling at a memory of a shared joke or a story from the past, wondering if Michael felt the same pull. One rainy night, the three of them huddled in Michael and Grace's living room, the rain tapping against the windows and the room dim except for the soft light of a lamp. Elena stared into the glass, her fingers tracing patterns on the pane, and finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she admitted she had been afraid to come back, afraid she wouldn't fit anymore, afraid that time had changed too much and they wouldn't remember the connection they once had. Grace reached out instinctively, taking Elena's hand in hers. Feeling the warmth and the tremor that ran beneath it, a human gesture that carried comfort without needing explanation. Michael leaned forward, resting an arm casually but protectively on the back of the couch, his voice gentle as he said they had missed her too, more than they realized, and that there was always a place for her with them. The air between them shifted, charged with unspoken emotions. A mixture of relief, longing, and uncertainty that none of them could name. Elena laughed softly, almost embarrassed by her own vulnerability, and Grace noticed how easily she settled between them. A presence that felt natural and yet somehow electric. A silent confirmation that the connection was real. As they talked, memories flowed, blending with present moments. The conversation moving fast, sometimes overlapping. Laughter erupting without warning, tears almost spilling but held back by the comfort of familiarity. They shared secrets they hadn't told anyone else, confessions of mistakes, moments of regret, hopes that had faded, and dreams that had stayed alive in the corners of their hearts. It was in these quiet, intense moments that Grace began to sense a shift, not romantic in any sudden, sharp way, but emotional, deep. A recognition that their friendship had evolved into something more nuanced, layered, and profoundly intimate. Michael noticed it too, though he tried to mask it with humor and casual remarks. Yet his eyes betrayed a tenderness reserved only for Elena and Grace together. By the end of the night, none of them wanted to leave, reluctant to step back into the routine that felt suddenly smaller than the space they now shared. As they said goodbye at the door, Elena paused, looking at them with an expression that balanced hope and fear, saying softly that she didn't want to interfere with what they had, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that being with them again was exactly what she needed. Grace squeezed her hand again, whispering that it was okay, that they would figure it out together. I promised neither of them fully understood yet, but felt necessary to offer. Elena smiled, a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability, before walking into the rainy night, leaving Grace and Michael standing together, hearts racing. Unspoken questions hanging between them like the mist around the streetlights. The drive home was quiet, but the silence was not empty. It hummed with the weight of emotion, the awareness that something significant had begun, something that would challenge them in ways they couldn't yet predict. Grace glanced at Michael, catching the same hesitant, thoughtful look she saw in herself, and realized that Elena's return had created not just excitement, but a delicate tension, a longing they both felt, but were unsure how to name or navigate. And in that moment, both of them knew that the weeks ahead would be unlike any they had experienced before, that every conversation, every touch, every shared glance might carry new meaning, and that the bond they thought was only familiar friendship had quietly deepened into something far more complex and emotionally charged. The night ended with the soft hum of the heater, the smell of rain on wet asphalt drifting through the open window, and an unspoken agreement to continue seeing Alina, to let her presence in their lives unfold naturally, even if it brought uncertainty, even if it brought questions they weren't ready to answer. The emotional gravity of those weeks settled in, wrapping around them gently but insistently. A quiet promise that the connection they had with Alina was no longer just a memory, yet was alive, pulsing, and waiting for the next step none of them dared to name aloud. The tension between them had been building quietly for weeks, and one evening it finally reached a point where silence was no longer enough. Michael, Grace, and Alina sat together in the dimly lit living room, the soft hum of the heater filling the pauses in conversation, the rain still drumming steadily against the windows. They had spent the day wandering through the city, sharing small moments, laughing over stories from the past. And yet, beneath all the jokes and chatter, there was a current of truth that demanded to be spoken. Michael shifted slightly, his fingers brushing against Grace's hand without thinking. And he felt a sudden urge to say what had been lodged in his chest for far too long. "We care about you," he said, voice low, deliberate, more than we realized. "I don't want to scare you, and I don't want to rush anything. But I can't ignore it anymore." Lena's eyes widened slightly, and Grace squeezed her hand instinctively, trying to anchor both of them in the moment without breaking the fragile balance of emotions. Alina swallowed, her throat tight, as if the words she wanted to say had been trapped behind a wall she hadn't dared climb before. She began, then stopped, blinking back the sudden surge of emotion that made her chest ache. Grace leaned forward gently, letting her voice carry the sincerity she felt. "And we're not asking you for something you can't give. We just want you to know that your presence matters to both of us. You've always mattered." The words hovered in the air, heavy with vulnerability, and for a moment, all three of them simply breathed together, listening to the storm outside and the quiet beating of hearts that had grown restless over time. Alina looked between them, taking in the depth of what they were saying. The honesty, the patience, and something in her chest loosened. She realized she had spent so long running from her own feelings that she had forgotten it was possible to be wanted without conditions, to be accepted without having to fight for it. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly, the simple truth cutting through the layers of tension. Michael's eyes softened, and he gave her a small, encouraging nod. "So are we," he admitted quietly. Grace reached across again, resting her hand over Elena's, a grounding gesture full of reassurance. The three of them sat like that for a moment, the storm outside echoing the storm inside, each of them aware of the fragility and beauty of what was unfolding. Slowly, Alina spoke again, this time with a steadier voice, asking the question that had been on all of their minds. "If I step toward this, how do we make sure none of us get hurt?" It was the question that carried the weight of reality, the unspoken fear that the bond they were forming could either blossom or fracture if not handled with care. Michael leaned back, thoughtful, tracing the rim of his coffee mug absent-mindedly before answering with honesty. "We don't have all the answers," he said, "but we can promise to be honest, to communicate, to check in with each other. We can take it slowly and make sure everyone feels safe." Grace nodded, her own heart pounding, feeling both fear and exhilaration. "And we'll listen. We'll be present. We won't rush or pressure anything. We just want to see where this could go, together, carefully." Alina let herself exhale, feeling the tight coil of anxiety in her chest relax just a little. She realized that the fear she had carried for so long was not about them rejecting her, but about how much she had longed for this connection without realizing it was possible. The room was quiet except for the rain, but in that quiet, the three of them heard something profound, the possibility of trust, of patience, and of something new and beautiful that could only exist if they approached it honestly. Alina looked down at their joined hands and felt an unexpected warmth spread through her, a reassurance that she wasn't alone in wanting this, in wanting them. They spoke little after that, the silence comfortable. each of them wrapped in the intensity of emotions they hadn't fully explored before. Every glance, every subtle gesture carried more weight than words could express. And yet it felt natural, unforced, like the calm after a storm where everything was still raw but alive. As the night deepened, they finally leaned back, allowing themselves to just be together, letting the feelings settle without trying to define them completely. They all knew the path ahead wouldn't be simple. It would require patience, courage, and constant honesty. But for the first time in weeks, perhaps months, there was a sense of clarity, of recognition that the connection between them had changed into something precious and fragile, something worth exploring. Alina finally whispered, almost to herself, "I want to try, if you'll let me." Michael and Grace shared a glance, an unspoken understanding passing between them, a promise that whatever came next, they would face it together, cautiously but sincerely. The night ended without resolution, but with a soft certainty that the journey had begun, that hearts were opening, and that the trust they had in each other was the foundation on which they would step forward. It was the beginning of a new chapter, tender, complicated, and beautiful, where longing, fear, and hope intertwined, leaving all three of them suspended in the delicate space between what they had been and what they could become. The weeks that followed were filled with careful steps and quiet discoveries, as Michael, Grace, and Alina navigated the fragile new rhythm between them. Nothing happened all at once. There were no dramatic confessions, no sudden declarations, only a slow unfolding of trust, affection, and shared moments that built a foundation stronger than any words could describe. Each morning, Michael and Grace woke to messages from Alina, small notes full of humor or encouragement, little glimpses of her thoughts and presence that made the day feel lighter. Even simple things, like cooking together or walking through the neighborhood, became charged with unspoken meaning, a silent acknowledgement of their connection and the care they had for one another. Sometimes Alina would hesitate, unsure if she was stepping too far, and Michael or Grace would gently reassure her, reminding her that she was wanted and appreciated, that her feelings mattered, and that there was no rush to define anything more than what naturally grew. There were moments of laughter that echoed late into the night, and moments of quiet intimacy where words were unnecessary. The three of them sitting close together, sharing warmth and presence in a way that felt safe and real. They learned each other's rhythms, the little habits and quirks that made each person unique, the gestures that conveyed trust or comfort, the glances that could express affection more clearly than speech. One evening they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees, the sky painted in deep gold and purple. Alina leaned against Grace, and Michael rested an arm around both of them. And in that simple, wordless act, the three realized they had created a space where all their hearts could coexist without fear or guilt. Conversations became deeper, exploring hopes and dreams that had been tucked away for years, discussing fears and doubts with honesty, and building a sense of safety that made vulnerability feel natural. Each decision, each step forward was guided by care and respect, ensuring that no one felt left behind or overwhelmed. Grace noticed how Elena's laughter lingered longer in her chest than it should, and Michael caught himself smiling more often without reason, each moment reinforcing that the bond they shared was real, mutual, and precious. Challenges still arose, small disagreements or moments of uncertainty, but the commitment to openness and understanding helped them navigate these quickly, without letting misunderstandings fester. They discovered joy in the simplest experiences, sharing coffee on a rainy morning, strolling through quiet streets, talking late into the night, and supporting each other through small stresses that suddenly felt lighter when faced together. One night, after a long day of work and errands, they found themselves sprawled across the living room floor, exhausted but laughing over a shared memory from years ago. Elena's head rested lightly on Grace's shoulder, Michael's hand draped across both of them, and in that moment, the three felt an unspoken certainty. They were choosing each other, not out of need, but out of care, desire, and the deep understanding that they belonged together in a way that didn't diminish anyone. The new chapter they had begun was delicate, requiring patience, trust, and respect, but it was alive, breathing, and full of possibility. Even small gestures, like brushing a hand across someone's arm or offering a word of encouragement during a stressful day, carried a weight of intimacy that had taken years to cultivate. They talked about the future sometimes, gently, exploring ideas and possibilities without pressure or expectation, imagining shared trips, quiet nights at home, and a life where the three of them could support and care for one another. Every step was deliberate, ensuring that each of their hearts remained safe, while exploring the new depths of affection that had grown naturally between them. They learned to celebrate not only the happiness but the vulnerability they shared, realizing that being open with one another was the greatest gift they could offer.